You lie awake at 3 in the morning, your mind racing through tomorrow's meetings, replaying conversations from yesterday, scrolling through your phone, even though the blue light burns your tired eyes. Your shoulders carry tension you don't remember gathering. Your jaw clenches without your permission. You're gripping the edges of tomorrow before it even arrives, holding on to yesterday, even though it's already gone, trying to control your sleep, your breath, your racing thoughts. And the harder you try, the more exhausted you become. You feel the weight of everything you cannot change, pressing down on your chest like a stone. The relationship that won't follow your timeline, the promotion that went to someone else, the body that won't heal fast enough, won't sleep on command, won't bend to your will, the future that refuses to reveal itself, the past that won't rewrite itself no matter how many times you replay it. You are exhausted from carrying what was never yours to carry. Tonight, that ends. Through 6 ancient Buddhist stories told not as distant parables, but as living wisdom that speaks directly to your racing mind and aching heart, you will learn what the enlightened masters discovered 25 centuries ago. That the tightest grip creates the deepest suffering. That true peace comes not from controlling life, but from surrendering to its flow. That the river has been trying to carry you all along and you've been too busy fighting it to notice. You will discover how to release what you cannot hold and find the deep rest that arrives only when you finally let go. If these words have touched something within you, something that has been waiting to exhale, gently press like to help this wisdom reach others who are struggling alone in the dark. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to stop fighting, to stop forcing, to simply be. And subscribe to Buddhist Insights Journey so these ancient teachings can continue to find you whenever your hands are clenched, whenever your heart is heavy, whenever you need to remember that surrender is not defeat. It is the only real victory. Now let your body sink deeper into whatever supports it. Allow your breath to soften and slow, like a wave returning to the ocean. Release your jaw, soften your shoulders, unclench your hands, and together let us begin this journey into the profound peace of letting go. The monk and the river, the wisdom of flowing rather than forcing. In ancient India, during the time when the Buddha still walked the earth teaching the Dharma, there lived a young monk named Subhuti. He was earnest and devoted, one of those students whose sincerity shone in everything he did. He had left his family's wealthy merchant home to seek liberation, trading silk robes for rough cotton, a comfortable bed for a thin mat on the monastery floor, and though he did not miss the luxury, he carried with him something more difficult to release: the habit of control, the belief that with enough effort and discipline and force of will, he could bend the world to his vision of how things should be. One monsoon season, word reached Subhuti's monastery that his teacher, the great master Mahakassapa, was gravely ill in a monastery on the far side of the Ganges River. The message was urgent. If Subhuti wished to receive his teacher's final instructions, he must come immediately. Subhuti gathered his few belongings, his begging bowl and meditation shawl, and set out before dawn, his heart both heavy with worry and bright with determination. He would reach his teacher in time. He would not fail in this. He would control the outcome through sheer dedication. By the time Subhuti reached the banks of the Ganges, The sun was climbing toward its zenith, and the river was swollen with monsoon rains, a churning mass of brown water moving with terrifying force. During the dry season, there were shallow places where one could wade across stones that formed natural stepping paths, fishermen with boats who ferried travelers for a small fee. But now, the river had transformed into something wild and untamable, and there was no boat, no ferry, no visible way across. Only this raging torrent that seemed to mock his urgency with its indifferent power. Subhuti stood at the water's edge, feeling panic begin to tighten his chest. He had to cross. His teacher was dying. Every moment mattered. He could not simply accept this obstacle. He would overcome it. He would make a way where there seemed to be no way. This is what discipline was for what willpower was for. He had not left the comforts of home and devoted years to rigorous practice, only to be stopped by water. He began to gather stones from the riverbank, large ones, that required all his strength to lift, and he waded into the shallows to place them, attempting to build a small dam that might slow the current enough for him to cross. He worked with furious intensity, his muscles straining, his rough cotton robes growing heavy with water and mud. He placed stone after stone, building a small wall, certain that if he could just redirect the flow, if he could just control this one portion of the river, he could create a path across. But the Ganges, swollen with the rains of 1,000 miles of mountains, simply flowed around his pile of stones as if it were nothing. The water found every gap, exploited every weakness, and his dam crumbled almost as quickly as he built it, stones tumbling away into the depths. Exhausted but not defeated, Subhuti tried a different approach. He remembered hearing of ancient engineers who could redirect water by digging channels. He found a piece of driftwood and began to dig frantically at the riverbank, trying to create a channel that would divert part of the river's flow, attempting to carve a new path that would lower the water level where he needed to cross. He dug until his hands bled, until the wooden tools splintered, and broke until his back screamed in protest. But the river, with its millions of gallons flowing from the Himalayan peaks, paid no attention to his small ditch. The water he managed to divert was instantly replaced the channel he dug, just as quickly filled and eroded away. Covered in mud, his hands torn and bleeding, his body trembling with exhaustion, Subhuti finally stopped digging. He sat heavily on the riverbank, and in his desperation he tried one more thing. He closed his eyes and entered into meditation, or tried to. His mind was too agitated for true stillness, but he gathered what concentration he could and began to direct it at the river itself. He visualized the water parting, imagined it becoming calm and shallow, tried to command it with the force of his intention. He had heard stories of yogis with such advanced powers that they could walk on water, could command the elements, could manifest the impossible through the strength of their meditation. Perhaps if he concentrated hard enough, if his will was strong enough, if his need was pure enough, the river would obey. But the river continued to roar and rush, completely indifferent to his mental commands, flowing exactly as rivers flow, following the ancient laws of gravity and volume and momentum that care nothing for human urgency or desire. And in that moment, as Subhuti opened his eyes to see the water still raging before him, unchanged, something inside him began to crack. Not the useful breaking that leads to breakthrough, but the painful splintering of a heart confronting the limits of its own power. He had tried everything. He had used his body, his mind, his will, his discipline. Everything he thought made him strong and capable, and none of it had mattered. The river was completely beyond his control, and his teacher was dying on the other side, and he had failed. He collapsed forward onto his hands and knees in the mud, his head hanging in exhaustion and defeat, too tired even to cry. The sound of the river filled his ears, and for the first time since he had arrived, he stopped trying to change it. He simply heard it. Just the sound of water being water, doing what water does, flowing toward the sea with an ancient and patient inevitability. He did not hear the old woman approach. She came walking along the riverbank path, carrying a large basket of mangoes on her head, moving with the unhurried grace of someone who had walked this path for decades. She was weathered and slight, her sari patched and faded, her feet bare and calloused. She looked at the young monk covered in mud and blood, at the scattered stones of his failed dam, at the abandoned ditch he had tried to dig, and something knowing and compassionate passed across her face. Without a word, she walked along the shoreline until she found what she was looking for, a large piece of driftwood, a log that had been smoothed by the river's patient work. She set down her basket, and with movements efficient from long practice, she pushed the log into the water. It bobbed and rocked for a moment, finding its balance, and then she placed her basket of mangoes on one end of it, stepped onto the log herself, and using a long stick to guide and balance, she floated out into the current. Subhuti lifted his head and watched transfixed as the old woman and her log moved across the raging river. She didn't fight the current. She didn't try to go straight across. Instead, she angled herself, letting the river carry her downstream, even as she moved toward the far bank, using the water's own force to propel her forward. When the current surged, she shifted her weight smoothly. When the log wanted to spin, she allowed it to turn and then gently corrected its course. She moved with the river rather than against it, and in this way, with far less effort than Subhuti had expended building his useless dam, she reached the other side. She stepped off onto the far bank, lifted her basket back onto her head, and continued on her way without looking back, leaving Subhuti alone with the teaching she had given without words. He sat there for a long time watching the river, and slowly, the teaching began to penetrate deeper than his exhaustion and defeat. The river was going to flow exactly as it was going to flow. No amount of his effort could change its fundamental nature. The old woman had not been stronger than him, had not known secret techniques or possessed supernatural powers. She had simply stopped trying to control what could not be controlled. She had stopped fighting and started flowing. She had surrendered to the river's nature, and in that surrender found the only kind of passage that was possible. Subhuti stood up slowly, his body aching in every joint. He walked along the shoreline until he found his own piece of driftwood, smaller than the old woman's but sufficient. His movements were slow and careful now, no longer frantic. He placed his small bundle of belongings on the log, used his meditation shawl to secure them, and stepped onto the wood. For a moment, his old instinct to control surged up. He wanted to grip tightly, to tense every muscle, to force the log to go exactly where he intended. But he remembered the old woman's grace, her fluid movements, and instead he softened. He let the river take him. He moved with its flow, angling toward the far shore, but surrendering to the current's path. and though it carried him far downstream from where he had started, though the crossing took him to a place he had not intended to go, he reached the other side safely, his strength preserved rather than exhausted by futile fighting. He pulled the log onto the bank and stood dripping in the sunlight, and something fundamental had shifted inside him. He walked along the far shore until he found the path that would lead to his teacher's monastery, and when he arrived, he learned that his teacher had rallied, that the crisis had passed, that there had been time after all. But the real teaching he had come to receive had already been delivered by an old woman and a river, the teaching that would stay with him for the rest of his life and echo through the centuries into your life right now in this moment, as you lie here, carrying your own burdens, fighting your own rivers. You know this struggle. You live it every day. You are Subhuti standing on the riverbank trying desperately to control what cannot be controlled. You sit in traffic, and though you know intellectually that your anger changes nothing, you grip the steering wheel until your knuckles turn white. You lean on the horn. You switch lanes frantically. You check your GPS over and over as if looking at it will somehow alter the reality of the cars ahead of you. You are trying to dam a river with stones. The traffic is going to move at the speed it moves. Your fury and your urgency and your force of will change nothing except the state of your nervous system, the tension in your shoulders, the cortisol flooding your bloodstream. You lie awake, trying to force yourself to sleep, and this very trying makes sleep impossible. You count sheep, you count breaths, you try every technique and trick, and meanwhile, your body grows more tense, your mind more agitated, because you are treating sleep as something to be conquered rather than something to be allowed. Sleep is a river. It will come when conditions permit it to come. You cannot dam it, divert it, or command it into existence. You can only stop fighting it and let your body remember what it has always known how to do. You are in a relationship, and you can feel the other person pulling away, changing, becoming someone slightly different than who they were, and you panic. You text more frequently. You make plans further in advance. You try to recreate the early magic through sheer effort. You attempt to control their feelings, their attention, their path of growth. You are building dams of neediness, digging ditches of demand, trying to meditate the river into stillness. But people are rivers too. They flow and change. They have their own nature, their own direction. You can walk alongside them for as long as your paths coincide, but you cannot make them stay through force. You cannot make them love you through strategy. The tighter you grip, the faster they slip away through your fingers. You have a vision for your career, for your body, for your life, and reality keeps refusing to cooperate. You make plans and unexpected obstacles arise. You set goals and your body gets injured. Your company downsizes. The economy shifts. A pandemic arrives. A relationship ends. An opportunity vanishes. And instead of adjusting your course, instead of working with what is, you exhaust yourself trying to force the original plan back into possibility. You are Subhuti building stone dams against monsoon floods, and you wonder why you are so tired all the time, why everything feels like such a struggle, why peace seems impossible. The teaching is simple, though not easy. The river is going to flow exactly as it flows. Your task is not to change the river. Your task is to learn to move with it. This does not mean passivity. The old woman was not passive. She actively sought out a log, she skillfully navigated the current, she made constant small adjustments. But she worked with the river's nature rather than against it. This is the difference between surrender and defeat, between flowing and drowning. Surrender is active. Surrender is intelligent. Surrender requires presence and attention and constant small adjustments. What surrender does not require is the exhausting and ultimately futile attempt to make reality other than it is. Let me teach you the practice that Subhuti carried with him from that river, crossing the practice that can transform your relationship with everything you cannot control. Settle into your position now, whether you are lying down or sitting, and bring your attention to your hands. Notice if they are clenched, if your fingers are curled, if you are gripping anything, the sheets, your clothes, the chair, even gripping the air itself. This is often where we unconsciously hold our need for control. Now very slowly, open your hands completely. Spread your fingers wide. Turn your palms up toward the sky or ceiling, and imagine that you are holding something precious in each palm. Perhaps in one hand, you hold a relationship, in the other, a hope for your future. You are not dropping them. You are simply holding them in an open palm instead of a closed fist. Notice the difference in your body. An open palm does not require constant muscle tension. An open palm can receive as well as give. An open palm allows things to rest there without imprisonment. Take a breath in, and as you exhale, imagine releasing just a little more of the grip, allowing whatever rests in your palms to simply be there, not controlled, not clenched, just present. If it chooses to stay, it stays. If it needs to leave, your open palm does not prevent it. This is the posture of surrender, holding life lightly enough that it can be life, rather than gripping so tightly that you strangle the very things you love. Practice this open palm breathing for a few minutes. Inhale and notice anywhere you are gripping: your jaw, your shoulders, your stomach, your mind. Exhale and practice the gentle release, the conscious unclenching. You are learning the wisdom of the river, the grace of the old woman, the liberation that Subhuti discovered in his exhaustion. You are learning that you were never meant to control the current. You were only ever meant to find your log and float. And here is the deeper truth, the one that Subhuti understood as he walked toward his teacher's monastery, with water still dripping from his robes. The river has been trying to carry you all along. Life has been trying to take you where you need to go, but you have been too busy fighting, too busy building dams and digging ditches and commanding the current to bend to your will, to notice that the river itself is intelligent, that it knows the way to the sea, that surrender is not about giving up, but about finally trusting the flow that has been supporting you since before you were born. The traffic will move at its own pace. Your sleep will come when your nervous system feels safe enough to let go. People will love you or leave you according to their own nature and journey, not according to your strategies. Your body will heal in its own time. Your career will unfold through a mysterious combination of effort and grace and timing that you cannot orchestrate from your small perspective. And you can either exhaust yourself trying to control these rivers, or you can find your piece of driftwood, step on with skill and attention and courage, and let the current carry you toward shores you never imagined arrivals more beautiful than the destinations you were trying to force. In the next story, you will meet an old farmer who loses his most prized possession and discovers that the words good and bad are just stories we tell about events whose true meaning we cannot yet see. For now, let your hands remain open. Let your breath continue soft, and feel yourself beginning perhaps for the first time to float. The old man who lost his horse, releasing judgment about good and bad. Near the northern frontier of ancient China, where the civilized world gave way to wild steppes and nomadic tribes, there lived an old farmer known throughout his village simply as Wei. He was neither wealthy nor poor, neither respected nor scorned. He lived quietly at the edge of the settlement with his only son, a strong young man of 20 years, and he made his living from a small plot of land and a single horse, a magnificent animal with a coat the color of polished chestnuts and eyes that held unusual intelligence. In that time and place, a good horse was not merely property, but the difference between survival and starvation, between prosperity and poverty. A horse could plow fields, carry loads to market, provide transportation, and in times of danger, offer escape. This horse was Wei's most valuable possession, the foundation of his modest life. The other villagers often gathered in the evenings to discuss their concerns, the quality of the harvest, the threat of raids from the northern tribes, the petty disputes that arise when people live close together. Wei rarely joined these gatherings. He spent his evenings sitting outside his simple home smoking his pipe, watching the sun set over the mountains, his face peaceful and unreadable as weathered stone. One morning in early autumn, Wei's son went to the stable to prepare the horse for ploughing and found it empty. The gate stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze. The horse had somehow worked the latch loose during the night and escaped heading north toward the open steppes where wild horses still ran free. The son searched frantically, calling and looking, but there was no sign of the animal. It had vanished as completely as water poured onto sand. By midday, the news had spread through the village. The farmers came to Wei's home, their faces grave with sympathy. They gathered around him as he sat on his wooden stool outside his door, still smoking his pipe with the same calm expression. "Wei," they said, shaking their heads in shared sorrow, "such terrible luck has befallen you. Your horse has run away. How will you plough your fields? How will you take your crops to market? Winter is coming, and without your horse you will surely suffer. This is a disaster. Such bad luck." Wei took his pipe from his mouth, exhaled a long stream of smoke that drifted away on the autumn breeze and said only one word: "Maybe." The villagers looked at each other in confusion. Maybe? What kind of response was this? The loss was obvious, the consequences clear. But Wei said nothing more, just returned his pipe to his mouth and continued gazing at the distant mountains, his face showing neither distress nor concern, simply present with what was. The neighbors eventually dispersed, murmuring among themselves about the old man's strange response, wondering if grief had addled his mind. But Wei went about his day as he always did, adjusting his plans, finding other ways to accomplish his work, accepting the new reality with the same equanimity he had accepted the old one. 7 days passed. On the morning of the 8th day, Wei's son woke to a sound he thought he had been dreaming, the thunder of hooves approaching from the north. He rushed outside to see an astonishing sight. His father's chestnut horse was returning, but not alone. Behind it ran a dozen wild horses, magnificent creatures that had never known bridle or saddle, their manes flowing like black silk in the dawn light. The escaped horse had found a wild herd and impossibly had led them back home. By the time the sun was fully risen, the entire village had gathered to witness the miracle. Wei's son, with help from neighbors, managed to drive the wild horses into a hastily reinforced corral. Where yesterday Wei had owned one horse, today he possessed 13, a fortune beyond anything a simple farmer might expect in a lifetime of work. He was suddenly one of the wealthiest men in the village. The farmers crowded around Wei, their faces bright with excitement and vicarious joy. "Wei!" they exclaimed, clapping him on the back, pumping his weathered hand. "What incredible fortune! What amazing luck! Your horse escapes and returns with 12 more. You must have been blessed by the ancestors. This is wonderful. Such good luck." Wei stood in the midst of their celebration, still holding his pipe, his expression unchanged from the week before when they had commiserated with him over his loss. He looked at the wild horses milling in his corral, looked at the excited faces of his neighbors, and said again, in the same neutral tone, "Maybe." The villagers' enthusiasm faltered slightly. Maybe the old man now possessed 13 horses, where he once had one. How could this not be obviously undeniably good fortune? But Wei offered no further explanation, and eventually the crowd dispersed, shaking their heads at his strange unwillingness to celebrate his good fortune. The following week, Wei's son began the hard work of training the wild horses. These were not gentle domestic animals, but creatures born to freedom, and they resisted every attempt to bridle them, to saddle them, to bend them to human will. The young man was strong and determined, and by the 5th day he had made progress with one of the largest stallions. The horse had accepted a bridle and was learning to respond to commands. The son, confident in his growing skill, decided to mount the horse. For a few moments, everything seemed to be going well. The horse walked in a circle, responding to the reins, and the young man felt a surge of pride. But then something startled the animal, perhaps a bird bursting from the grass, perhaps just the lingering wildness in its blood. The horse reared up violently, screaming, its front legs pawing the air. Wei's son clung on for a moment, but then the horse twisted and bucked with explosive force, and the young man was thrown hard to the ground. The sickening crack of bone was heard clearly by Wei, who had been watching from the fence. His son lay in the dirt, his left leg bent at an unnatural angle, his face white with pain and shock. Wei climbed over the fence with surprising speed for his age, knelt beside his son, and called for help. By afternoon, the village bone setter had done what he could, setting the badly broken leg and wrapping it in splints and herbs. The verdict was clear: the leg would heal, but it would take many months, and the young man would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. His days of hard physical labor were over. Once again, the villagers gathered at Wei's home, but this time there was no confusion about what to say. This was clearly, obviously, terrible luck. "Wei," they said, their voices heavy with genuine sorrow. "We are so sorry. Your son, your only son, has been badly injured. He will never be the same, all because of those cursed wild horses. It would have been better if your original horse had never returned. What seemed like good fortune has turned into tragedy. The horses that looked like a blessing have brought disaster to your house. Such terrible, terrible bad luck." Wei sat beside his son's sleeping mat, keeping watch through the night, tending the fire, occasionally adjusting the blanket. When the neighbors spoke their condolences, he looked up at them with the same calm, weathered face they had seen twice before. His eyes were sad, but not despairing, concerned, but not destroyed. And once more he said the same word, maybe. This time, several of the villagers grew frustrated. How could he say maybe to this obvious tragedy? His son's leg was broken, his future was compromised. Where was the uncertainty in this plain fact? But Wei said nothing more, and the villagers left shaking their heads, wondering if the old man's strange detachment was wisdom or foolishness. 3 weeks passed. The son's leg was beginning to heal, though he still could not walk. The family's routine had adjusted around his injury. Wei had sold several of the wild horses to pay for medicine and to compensate for the work his son could no longer do. Life continued as life does, neither stopping for tragedy nor pausing for celebration. Then one cold morning the village awoke to the sound of drums and horns. An imperial army unit was marching through the region, and they came with a decree from the capital. The northern tribes had been making incursions across the border, raiding villages, burning crops. The emperor had ordered a military campaign, and every able-bodied young man was to be conscripted immediately. There would be no exceptions, no delays. The soldiers went from house to house, taking sons from their weeping mothers' husbands, from their pleading wives. The conscription was brutal and absolute. The villagers knew what this meant. The northern campaigns were savage. Most young men who marched north with the army never returned. They died in battle or from disease, or from the terrible cold of the winter steppes. To be conscripted was more often than not a death sentence. The soldiers came to Wei's house. They found the old man sitting outside as usual, his son lying on a mat nearby, his broken leg still splintered and useless. The officer in charge looked at the young man, saw immediately that he could not march or fight, and moved on without a word. All through the village, fathers watched their sons being taken away, perhaps forever. But Wei's son remained alive, safe, his broken leg having spared him from a fate far worse than injury. By evening, when the army had departed, taking 24 young men with them, the villagers gathered again at Wei's house. But this time they came in silence, their faces stunned with the realization of what had just occurred. What they had called a tragedy 3 weeks ago had saved the young man's life. The broken leg that seemed like such misfortune had proven to be a strange and terrible kind of blessing. "Wei!" One of the old men finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your son's injury, it saved him. If he had been healthy, he would be marching north right now with all the others, most of whom will never come home. What we called bad luck was actually, we don't know what it was. We don't know anything." Wei looked at his neighbors, at their shocked faces, at the empty spaces where their sons had stood just hours before, and his expression held deep compassion, but no surprise. For the 4th time to the 4th event in this chain of fortune and misfortune, blessing and curse, he said the same word he had said to all the others, maybe. But this time, the word held a teaching that finally broke through. The villagers understood, perhaps for the first time in their lives, that they had no idea what anything meant. They could not see far enough, could not know enough to judge whether any event was truly good or bad. They had called the horse's escape a disaster, and its return a miracle, and the son's injury a tragedy, and the conscription a horror, and they had been wrong every time, or right every time, or neither, because good and bad were just stories they were telling about events whose true meaning lay beyond their ability to perceive. You know this pattern. You live it constantly. You check your phone and see that the job offer you desperately wanted has gone to someone else, and you spiral immediately into a story of failure and unworthiness. You decide this is bad, definitely bad, terrible luck, a sign that you are not good enough, that your life is going wrong, that the universe is against you. You carry this story for days, weeks, letting it poison your confidence and darken your mood. You cannot see that the job you didn't get would have placed you under a toxic manager who would have made your life miserable, or that it would have required a relocation that would have put you far from the person you were meant to meet, or that its loss would create the space and desperation that would finally push you to pursue the work you were actually meant to do. You cannot see 6 months ahead when you will be grateful you didn't get that job. You can only see now, and now looks like failure. So you judge it as bad and make yourself suffer twice, once from the loss itself, and again from your story about what the loss means. You are in a relationship that feels perfect, and then suddenly it ends. They say they need space, or they've met someone else, or they've realized this isn't right, and your world collapses. This is bad. This is the worst thing that could happen. You are heartbroken and lost, and you cannot imagine how this could be anything other than a tragedy. You cannot see that this person who seemed so right would have slowly dimmed your light, would have kept you small in ways you wouldn't notice until years had passed, would have prevented you from becoming who you were meant to become. You cannot see the person you'll meet 2 years from now who will feel like coming home in a way this relationship never quite did. You cannot see that this ending is actually an opening, that this loss is creating space for a finding. You can only see the pain of now, so you label it as bad and sink into victimhood and despair. Your company announces layoffs and your position is eliminated. Bad luck, obviously. You are angry and scared and humiliated. How will you pay your bills? What will people think? Your identity as a successful professional has been stripped away. This is clearly, undeniably, a disaster. Except that 3 months later, forced by necessity to reconsider your path, you start the small business you'd been too comfortable to risk before. Or you take the consulting project that introduces you to an entirely new industry. Or you use the severance to finally get training in the work you'd always wanted to do but never had time for. Or you simply discover that you're more resilient than you knew, that you can survive uncertainty, that your worth was never actually tied to that job title you thought defined you. The layoff that looked like an ending becomes the beginning of something truer. But you couldn't see that in the moment of loss. You could only judge it as bad and make yourself suffer. You get sick and you decide this is terrible luck, your body betraying you, time being stolen from your productive life. You cannot see that this illness is forcing you to finally rest, to finally listen to the burnout signals you'd been ignoring for years, to finally slow down enough to notice that the life you were living was not actually a life, but a desperate sprint towards some finish line that didn't exist. You cannot see that this forced pause will save you from the complete breakdown that was coming. You can only see the inconvenience, the pain, the loss of control, so you label it as bad and resist it with everything you have, making your recovery slower and harder than it needs to be. even small things, everyday things. You miss your flight and rage about the incompetence of the airline, the bad luck, the ruined plans. You cannot see that the flight you missed will have severe turbulence that would have traumatized you, or that this delay puts you in the airport at the exact time you'll run into an old friend whose random conversation will change your trajectory, or that you simply needed this forced pause in your frantic schedule. You get a parking ticket and curse your bad luck. You cannot see that this minor expense will make you more cautious next week, when that caution will prevent an accident. Someone cancels plans, and you feel rejected, wounded, certain this means they don't value you. You cannot see that you desperately needed a night alone, but wouldn't have given it to yourself without this excuse. The teaching that Old Man Wei embodied in his 4 maybes is perhaps the most liberating and most difficult wisdom you can learn. You do not know what anything means. You cannot see far enough. The event you are labeling as the worst thing that ever happened to you might be the strange and painful gift that redirects you toward your actual life. The loss you are calling a tragedy might be a protection you cannot yet perceive. The delay you are calling bad luck might be divine timing you cannot yet understand. The ending you are calling a disaster might be the liberation you were too afraid to choose for yourself. This does not mean you should pretend to feel happy about painful things. Wei was not pretending. His face showed sadness. When his son was injured, showed concern during the conscription. The teaching is not to fake positivity or spiritual bypass your genuine feelings. The teaching is to hold your judgments lightly, to notice when you are gripping tightly to the story that something is definitely good or definitely bad, and to loosen that grip just enough to whisper to yourself, maybe I cannot see the whole picture. Maybe this means something I cannot yet understand. Maybe my interpretation of this event is just one small thread in a tapestry I am too close to perceive. Let me teach you the practice that Wei's teaching offers. Settle into your breath again and bring to mind something that happened recently that you have labeled as bad. Perhaps a rejection, a loss, a disappointment, a change you didn't want. Feel where you are holding that judgment in your body, the tightness in your chest, the knot in your stomach, the tension that comes from gripping certainty about what this event means. Now, rather than trying to convince yourself it's actually good, rather than forcing false positivity, simply introduce the word maybe into your story. This is a disaster becomes, maybe this is a disaster. My life is ruined becomes, maybe my life is ruined. This means I'm not good enough becomes, maybe this means I'm not good enough. The word maybe creates a small crack in the prison of certainty. It doesn't deny your pain or minimize your loss. It simply acknowledges the truth that you are making an interpretation based on incomplete information, that you are judging a chapter when you haven't read to the end of the book, that your small perspective cannot possibly comprehend the vast and mysterious unfolding of a life. Notice what happens in your body when you add maybe to your certainties. Does the grip loosen slightly? Does the story have a little more air in it? This is not about convincing yourself that bad things are good. This is about releasing your desperate need to know what everything means right now in this moment from your limited vantage point. Now bring to mind something you have labeled as definitely good, as lucky, as the best thing that could have happened. Feel the grasping around this too. The way you are gripping this story, terrified that someone might take it away or that you might be wrong about it. Add maybe here too. This is the best thing ever becomes maybe this is the best thing ever. I'm so lucky this happened becomes maybe I'm lucky this happened. Again, you are not trying to diminish your joy or create anxiety where there was happiness. You are simply practicing holding even good fortune lightly, not gripping it so tightly that its inevitable change will destroy you. The deepest freedom comes when you can hold both pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fortune and misfortune, with equal lightness, meeting each with ways profound maybe. This is not indifference. This is wisdom. This is the recognition that you are living one sentence at a time in a story whose full meaning will only be revealed when you reach an ending you cannot see from here. And that ending might itself be a beginning you cannot imagine. What if the worst thing that ever happened to you was actually the thread that pulled you out of a life that was never meant to be yours? What if the best thing was actually leading you toward a lesson you needed to learn? What if everything, absolutely everything, is more mysterious and more purposeful than your small judgments can comprehend? You don't have to know. You only have to loosen your grip on thinking you know. You only have to whisper, maybe, and feel the liberation that comes when you stop demanding that reality reveal its secrets on your timeline. Old Man Wei lost his horse and gained 12. His son broke his leg and avoided conscription. But the real teaching is not about those specific reversals. The real teaching is that reversals will keep coming, that what looks like fortune will reveal new challenges, that what looks like disaster will open unexpected doors, that the river of life will keep flowing in ways your judgments cannot contain or predict. And you can exhaust yourself, labeling every turn as good or bad, or you can learn to float on the current with your hands open, saying maybe to everything, letting the story unfold without demanding to know how it ends. In the next chapter, a devoted monk will receive a beautiful bowl and watch it crack, and in that crack discover a teaching about the prison of perfection that keeps so many of us from ever feeling at peace with what is. For now, practice your maybes. Practice the humility of not knowing. Practice the freedom of releasing your judgments just enough to let life surprise you. The old man is still sitting outside his house smoking his pipe, watching the mountains, his face peaceful with the knowledge that he knows nothing. And in that not knowing, he has found something more valuable than all his horses combined. Ananda and the Cracked Bowl. Accepting what cannot be perfect. In the ancient city of Rajagaha, during the time when the Buddha's Sangha was growing from a handful of devoted followers into a movement that would transform the spiritual landscape of Asia, there lived a monk named Ananda who was perhaps closer to the Buddha than any other disciple. He was the Buddha's cousin, his attendant, his constant companion, and the keeper of his teachings. While other monks were known for their fierce asceticism or their profound meditation attainments or their scholarly brilliance, Ananda was known for something else, his perfect memory and his devotion to detail. He could recall every discourse the Buddha had given, every question asked, and answer provided, remembering not just the words, but the inflection, the context, the weather on that day, the exact placement of everyone present. This gift would later preserve the teachings for generations, but it also meant that Ananda lived in a world where everything mattered, where every detail carried weight, where nothing could be allowed to be less than it should be. Ananda owned very little, as was proper for a monk who had renounced the world. He had his 3 robes, one for wearing, one for backup, one for ceremonial occasions. He had his needle and thread for mending. He had his razor for shaving his head. He had his water filter because the Buddha had taught compassion for even the smallest creatures that lived in water. And he had his begging bowl, the most essential possession of any monk, the simple clay vessel that symbolized humility and dependence on the generosity of others. The bowl he carried each morning through the streets to receive whatever food the laypeople chose to offer. For years, Ananda had used the same bowl, a plain vessel that had been given to him when he first ordained. It was functional but rough, with a thick, heavy base and uneven walls, the kind of bowl that a village potter makes quickly without much concern for aesthetics. It served its purpose, but it was not beautiful. And then one day, a wealthy patron of the Sangha, a merchant who had been moved by the Buddha's teachings and wished to express his gratitude, commissioned a master potter to create a special bowl for Ananda. The merchant had noticed the rough quality of Ananda's current bowl and wanted to offer something worthy of the Buddha's chief attendant. The new bowl arrived wrapped in silk cloth, and when Ananda unwrapped it, he caught his breath. It was exquisite. The potter had used the finest clay from the riverbank, had shaped it with perfect symmetry. On his wheel had glazed it with a soft celadon color that seemed to hold light like water holds sky. The walls were thin but strong, the rim smooth, and even the base perfectly balanced. When Ananda held it, it fit his hands as if it had been made by measuring his palms. It was not ostentatious, a monk's bowl should never be, but within the constraints of simplicity, it was a masterpiece of the potter's art. Ananda accepted the gift with proper gratitude, knowing that to refuse would dishonor the merchant's generosity and devotion. But from the moment the bowl came into his possession, something shifted in his relationship with his practice. He found himself handling it with excessive care, wrapping it in cloth each night, placing it in the safest corner of his dwelling, checking on it multiple times to ensure it remained untouched. When he carried it on arm's rounds, he held it with both hands, even when one would have sufficed watching every step, hyper-aware of any uneven ground or jostling crowd. He washed it with special attention, dried it carefully, examined it frequently, to ensure no blemish had appeared on its perfect surface. The other monks noticed, but said nothing. Ananda was entitled to care for his belongings properly, and there was nothing explicitly wrong with treating a gift with respect. But those who knew him well could see that this had gone beyond respect into something else, a kind of anxious vigilance, a constant low-level worry, as if his peace of mind had become dependent on the bowl's continued perfection. He had become attached, and attachment creates suffering. But Ananda, for all his devotion and intelligence, could not see this in himself. He only knew that this beautiful bowl made him happy, and that he wanted desperately to keep it exactly as it was. 3 months passed. It was early morning, the time when monks leave their dwellings to walk through the town collecting alms. The streets of Rajagaha were narrow and crowded, lined with stone walls and wooden buildings stacked against each other like boxes. Ananda walked mindfully as always, his new bowl cradled carefully in his hands, his eyes downcast in the proper modest manner, but also watchful for any hazard that might threaten his precious possession. He did not see the loose stone in the wall he was passing. It had been dislodged by recent rains held in place only by friction and the weight of the stones above it. As Ananda walked past, his robe brushed against the wall, and the small vibration was enough. The stone shifted, tilted, and fell, tumbling down from shoulder height directly onto the beautiful celadon bowl. The sound was small, just a sharp crack, nothing dramatic, but to Ananda it was as loud as a mountain splitting. He looked down and saw the thin dark line that now ran from the rim of the bowl down toward the base, a crack that divided the perfect surface like a scar on flawless skin. The bowl was not shattered. It was still functional, still able to hold food, still structurally sound. But it was no longer perfect. The flaw was visible, permanent, irreversible. Ananda stood frozen in the narrow street, people flowing around him, the morning continuing as mornings do, while inside him something collapsed. He felt a pain in his chest that seemed disproportionate to a crack in a bowl, but he could not control it. Shame flooded through him. Shame that he had failed to protect this gift, that his carelessness had allowed this to happen, that he had proven unworthy of such a beautiful offering. Beneath the shame was a deeper grief, the recognition that something he had cherished for its perfection was now permanently marred, and no amount of care or skill could restore what had been lost. He completed his arms round mechanically, barely aware of what food was placed in his now flawed bowl, his mind circling obsessively around the crack, replaying the moment of impact, imagining all the ways he could have prevented it if he had walked on the other side of the street, if he had been more careful, if he had simply left the bowl at home and continued using his old rough one. By the time he returned to the monastery, his distress was visible on his face, and when the Buddha saw him, he immediately perceived that his devoted attendant was suffering. "Ananda," the Buddha called gently, "come sit with me." Ananda approached and sat heavily on the ground, still holding the bowl, unable to meet the Buddha's eyes. The Buddha looked at the bowl, saw the crack immediately, and understood everything. He reached out and took the bowl from Ananda's reluctant hands, turning it slowly, examining it from every angle, running his finger along the crack, feeling its depth and extent. "Tell me, Ananda," the Buddha said after a long silence, his voice warm with compassion. "Does this bowl still hold rice?" Ananda looked up, confused by the question. "Yes, Lord," he answered hesitantly. "Can you still use it to collect alms?" "Yes, Lord." "Can you still eat from it?" "Yes, Lord." "Then what exactly is the problem?" The Buddha held the bowl up to the morning light, and the crack caught the sun, creating a thin line of shadow and light across the glazed surface. "Ananda, do you see this crack as damage?" "Yes, Lord," Ananda said, his voice tight with the emotion he was trying to control. "It was perfect, and now it is ruined. I failed to protect it. I was careless. This beautiful gift has been destroyed by my negligence." The Buddha set the bowl down gently between them. "Ananda, my devoted friend, let me tell you what I see when I look at this crack. I see a bowl participating in the nature of all things. I see impermanence made visible. I see the truth we have been teaching made manifest in clay and glaze. This crack is not damage. This is the bowl's honest relationship with reality." Ananda listened, his brow furrowed, not yet understanding. The Buddha continued his voice, taking on the quality it held when he was offering teachings that would echo through the centuries. When this bowl was first made, it was already cracked. Do you understand? The crack was already there, latent, inevitable, waiting. From the moment the potter shaped the clay, from the moment it entered the fire, from the moment it took solid form, it carried within it the certainty of change, of breaking, of returning eventually to dust. This is not a flaw. This is the nature of all formed things. The crack you see now is simply the bowl's way of showing you what was always true, that nothing remains pristine, that nothing stays frozen in the moment of its perfection, that to exist in form is to participate in the dance of arising and passing away. The Buddha picked up the bowl again, cradling it as one might hold something precious rather than damaged. Your suffering, Ananda, does not come from the crack. Your suffering comes from your demand that the bowl remain unchanged. You wanted to control time, to freeze this object in its moment of perfection, to prevent it from being what all things are, temporary, vulnerable, subject to conditions beyond your control. The bowl has done nothing wrong. It has simply agreed to be a bowl, which means agreeing to change, to chip, to crack, eventually to shatter and return to earth. But you wanted it to be something else, permanent, controllable, immune to the very impermanence we teach about every day. Tears had begun to stream down Ananda's face, not from sadness now, but from recognition. The Buddha's words were finding their way past his shame into something deeper, a place where he could feel how much energy he had been spending trying to keep everything perfect, how exhausting it had been to live in constant vigilance against the inevitable. Ananda, the Buddha said softly, "How many times have you heard me teach that all formed things are impermanent? How many times have you memorized and repeated the words, 'All that arises will cease'? And yet, when impermanence arrives in the form of a small crack in your bowl, you receive it as tragedy rather than as teaching. You receive it as evidence of your failure rather than as proof that the Dharma is true." The Buddha placed the bowl back in Ananda's hands. "Keep this bowl. Use it every day. Let the crack remind you that you cannot stop time, cannot prevent change, cannot control the world into remaining exactly as you wish it to be. And let it remind you of something else, that cracked things can still serve their purpose, that damaged things can still be beautiful, that nothing has to be perfect to be valuable. The bowl is still a bowl. You are still you. Neither of you has been destroyed by this small fracture. You have simply been introduced to truth." You know Ananda's pain intimately because you live it every single day. You stand in front of the mirror each morning and catalogue your flaws with the same devastation Ananda felt looking at his cracked bowl. This wrinkle that wasn't there last year, this grey hair, this softness where there used to be firmness. These signs that your body is participating in time, is changing, is moving through its natural cycles. You receive them as damage, as evidence that you are failing at the impossible task of remaining unchanged. You examine your face with harsh judgment, seeing only what is cracked, only what fails to match the perfect image you carry in your mind of what you should look like. You cannot see that these changes are not damage. They are simply your body being honest about the fact that it is alive, and therefore subject to the only law that life obeys, the law of change. You send a text message and then read it 17 times, finding the awkward phrasing, the missing comma, the word that doesn't quite capture what you meant. You cringe with shame, certain that this small imperfection has revealed something terrible about you, has shown the other person that you are not as articulate, or intelligent or careful as you should be. You cannot see that they probably read your message, once understood your meaning perfectly well, and moved on with their day without analyzing your comma placement. But you carry this small crack like a wound, replaying it, wishing you could unsend and rephrase, demanding from yourself a perfection that would require you to be something other than a human being typing quickly on a phone. You complete a project at work, a report, a presentation, a product, and rather than feeling satisfaction at finishing, you immediately see only its flaws. This section could be stronger. That graphic is slightly off-center. The conclusion doesn't quite land with the impact you wanted. You present it while internally apologizing for all the ways it fails to match the perfect version that existed in your imagination. You cannot receive compliments because you can only see the cracks. And if someone offers genuine praise, you dismiss it, certain they haven't looked closely enough to see all the ways you've failed. You are Ananda, holding a functional bowl and calling it ruined, unable to recognize that good enough is not a compromise, but an acknowledgement of reality. You look at your life, your home, your relationships, your career, your body, your past choices, and you see only what is cracked. Your home is never quite clean enough, organized enough, decorated in a way that matches the perfect images you see on social media. Your relationships are never quite as effortless or passionate or deep as the ones you imagine other people have. Your career is never quite as impressive or successful or meaningful as it should be by now. Your body never quite meets the standard you hold for it. And beneath all of this runs the exhausting current of perfectionism, the belief that if you just try harder, plan, better control more carefully, you can finally create a life without cracks, a self without flaws, an existence that meets the impossible standard that lives in your imagination. But here is what the Buddha was teaching Ananda, what he is teaching you right now through this ancient story. The standard itself is the problem. The demand for perfection is not a high ideal. It is a violence you commit against yourself, a refusal to accept that you are a human being, and not a god, that you live in time, and not in some eternal frozen moment that you are subject to conditions and circumstances and limitations, and the simple fact of being formed matter moving through a changing world. In Japan, there is an ancient aesthetic philosophy called wabi-sabi that sees beauty specifically in imperfection, in impermanence, in the incomplete. A tea bowl with an asymmetrical shape, a wall with faded paint, a garden where moss grows wild over planned pathways. These are not failures of design, but embodiments of truth. They are honest about what they are. They do not pretend to be immune to time. And there is an even more profound practice called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery by mending the cracks with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. When a precious bowl breaks, rather than hiding the damage or throwing the bowl away in shame, the artisan highlights the cracks, makes them more visible, transforms them into the most beautiful part of the object. A bowl that has been broken and repaired with gold is more valuable, more beautiful, more honored than a bowl that has never been damaged, because it carries its history visibly, because it tells the truth about what it means to exist in form, because its cracks have become its most distinctive feature. This is what the Buddha was offering Ananda, not a way to prevent cracks, but a way to see them differently. Not as evidence of failure, but as evidence of participation in life. Your wrinkles are not damage. They are a map of the expressions you have made, the laughter and worry and concentration that have shaped your face into something more interesting than smooth perfection. Your mistakes are not evidence that you are broken. They are proof that you have tried things, risked failure, lived outside the prison of safety. Your body's changes are not betrayal. They are simply your body being honest about the fact that it is alive and therefore constantly transforming. Your imperfect relationships are not evidence that you are unlovable. They are proof that you have allowed others close enough to see you as you actually are, rather than as the performance you could maintain for strangers. The crack in Ananda's bowl did not make it less useful. It made it more honest. And your cracks, the ones you hide, the ones you are ashamed of, the ones you believe disqualify you from being loved or valued, or enough, these are not preventing you from living a good life. Your attempt to hide them is what is preventing you from living. Your energy spent pretending to be uncracked is energy you could be spending actually living. Let me teach you the practice that emerged from Ananda's teaching. Find a quiet moment and bring to awareness something about yourself that you judge as imperfect, something you are ashamed of, something you work hard to hide or fix or control. Perhaps it is something about your body, your personality, your history, your current circumstances. Feel how you hold this imperfection with shame, with judgment, with the sense that it makes you less than you should be. Now, with as much compassion as you can summon, try seeing this crack the way the Buddha saw Ananda's bowl. Not as damage, but as evidence that you are participating in life. Not as proof that you have failed, but as proof that you are subject to the same conditions as every other human being who has ever lived. Ask yourself, does this imperfection actually prevent me from being loved, from being valuable, from serving my purpose? Or have I decided it does, because I have been taught that only perfect things are worthy? Imagine taking this crack in yourself and rather than hiding it, highlighting it with gold. What would it mean to own this imperfection openly, to stop spending energy concealing it, to let it become part of your story, rather than the shameful secret you carry? This does not mean broadcasting your vulnerabilities to people who have not earned the right to know them. It means simply releasing the exhausting vigilance, the constant monitoring, the fear that if people see this crack, they will reject you. Most people are too busy worrying about their own cracks to spend much time examining yours. And the ones who would reject you for being imperfect are rejecting reality itself, and their rejection tells you about their limitations, not yours. Practice catching yourself in moments of perfectionist judgment. When you are about to send an email and you have revised it for the 5th time, trying to make it flawless, notice the grip. Ask yourself, is this email good enough to communicate what I need to communicate? If yes, send it. Let it be cracked. When you are getting ready to leave the house and you catch yourself changing clothes for the 3rd time, seeking the perfect outfit, notice the grip. Ask yourself, is this good enough to be comfortable and appropriate? If yes, leave. Let yourself be cracked. When you are working on a creative project and you keep starting over demanding perfection before you will share it with anyone, notice the grip. Ask yourself, is this good enough to be valuable, to offer something to move the work forward? If yes, share it. Let it be cracked. Good enough is not mediocrity. Good enough is wisdom. Good enough is the recognition that you are a bowl that holds rice, not a museum piece that must never be touched. Good enough is the understanding that your purpose is to be used, not to be perfect. Good enough is the liberation that comes when you stop trying to control time and simply allow yourself to be what you are: temporary, vulnerable, cracked, and still somehow beautiful. Still somehow enough. Ananda carried that cracked bowl for the rest of his life. He used it every day on his alms rounds, ate from it every meal, and each time he saw the crack, he remembered the Buddha's teaching. The bowl never became perfect again. The crack never disappeared. But Ananda's relationship to the crack changed completely. What had once been a source of shame became a reminder of truth. What had looked like damage became a teacher. The bowl served its purpose perfectly, not despite its crack, but including it because the crack was simply part of what the bowl was, a formed thing, participating in the eternal dance of change. You are that bowl. Your cracks are not preventing you from being what you are meant to be. They are part of what you are meant to be. Stop trying to fix them, hide them, control them out of existence. Let them be there. Let them catch the light. Let them tell the truth about you, that you have lived, that you have tried, that you have broken and continued anyway, that you are not a perfect object, but a human being in motion, and that this is not a failure. This is the only way to be alive. In the next chapter, an illiterate kitchen worker will defeat a renowned scholar in a contest of wisdom, and in doing so reveal the most subtle form of control, the grip we maintain on being right, on knowing, on possessing the truth. For now, let your imperfections be. Let yourself be cracked and still whole. Let yourself be flawed and still enough. The bowl holds rice. That is all it ever needed to do. The Bodhi tree has no branches, releasing attachment to being right. In the mountains of southern China during the Tang dynasty, when Buddhism had spread from India and taken root in Chinese soil, there stood a monastery that housed over 700 monks under the guidance of the fifth patriarch, Master Hongren. The monastery was a place of serious practice, of rigorous meditation and study, where monks devoted their entire lives to the pursuit of enlightenment. Among these hundreds of dedicated practitioners, one monk stood above all others in reputation and respect. Shenshu, the head monk, a scholar of profound learning who had studied the sutras for decades, whose understanding of Buddhist philosophy was considered unmatched, whose discipline and dedication were held up as an example to younger monks. If anyone was prepared to inherit the patriarch's position and become the sixth patriarch, everyone agreed it would be Shenshu. But Master Hongren, like all truly wise teachers, understood that enlightenment is not a prize given to the most learned or the most disciplined or the most respected. It is a recognition that can come to anyone who sees clearly, regardless of their education or status. And so as he grew older and knew his time was approaching to choose a successor, he announced to all the monks that he would hold a contest. Each monk should compose a verse, a poem that demonstrated their understanding of the Dharma, and he would choose his successor based on these verses. The monk whose poem showed the deepest insight would inherit the teaching. The announcement created a stir of excitement and anxiety throughout the monastery, but the anxiety was largely performative. Everyone knew that Shenshu would write the winning verse. The other monks whispered among themselves that there was no point in even trying. How could their simple understanding compete with Shengshu's decades of study and meditation? Even Shengshu himself felt the weight of expectation. This was not a contest. It was a coronation waiting to happen. For days, Shengshu contemplated what he would write. He wanted his verse to be perfect, to capture the essence of practice, to demonstrate not only his understanding, but also his humility and devotion. Finally, in the middle of the night, when no one would see him, and perhaps judge him for presumption, he wrote his verse on the wall of the monastery's main corridor, where everyone would find it in the morning. The body is the Bodhi tree. The mind is like a clear mirror's stand. At all times we must strive to polish it and must not let dust collect upon it. When the monks discovered the verse at dawn, they gathered around it in wonder and approval. It was perfect. It captured exactly what they had been taught about practice, that the mind must be kept pure through constant vigilance, that enlightenment requires continuous effort to polish away the dust of delusion, that the path is one of gradual purification. They praised Shengshu's verse to each other, certain that Master Hongren would approve it and make Shengshu the sixth patriarch. Some monks even began memorizing it, chanting it as they walked, using it as a meditation instruction. But there was one person in the monastery who heard the verse and felt troubled by it, though he could not have explained why in sophisticated Buddhist terminology. His name was Huineng, and he was not a monk, but a worker in the monastery kitchen, an illiterate peasant from the southern regions who had come to the monastery several months earlier after hearing a sutra being chanted in the marketplace and experiencing something that shattered his ordinary understanding of reality. He could not read or write, had no education in philosophy, or scripture held no position of respect or authority. He spent his days pounding rice to remove the husks, doing the manual labor that kept the monastery fed, living at the very bottom of the hierarchy. When Huineng heard the other monks reciting Shengshu's verse with admiration, something in him knew that it was not quite right, that it still carried a fundamental misunderstanding, though he could not have articulated what. After his work was finished that evening, he approached a monk who could write and asked him to commit something to the wall beside Shengshu's verse. The monk, amused and curious about what this illiterate kitchen worker could possibly contribute to a contest of spiritual understanding, agreed. Huineng spoke, and the monk wrote, "Bodhi originally has no tree. The clear mirror also has no stand. Buddha nature is always clean and pure. Where could dust arise?" When Master Hongren saw both verses the next morning, he understood immediately. Shengshu's verse, for all its eloquence and correctness, still operated from within dualistic thinking. It assumed there was a self that needed purifying, a mind that needed polishing, dust that needed removing. It was a perfect expression of gradual cultivation of the path of effort and discipline. It was correct in every way that correctness could be measured. But Huineng's verse pointed to something beyond correctness, to the direct recognition that there is no separate self to purify, no mind that can be tarnished, no dust that can collect on what is fundamentally empty and luminous. It pointed not to the path, but to the recognition that there is no path, because there is nowhere to go, nothing to achieve, no one to become. It was, in a sense, completely wrong according to all conventional understanding, and yet it was more true than truth itself. Master Hongren knew he could not publicly announce that the illiterate kitchen worker had surpassed the renowned head monk, the monastery would erupt in controversy. Sheng Xiu's followers would cause problems. Huineng himself might be in danger from jealous monks who had devoted their lives to study and discipline, only to be surpassed by an uneducated peasant. So, he called Huineng to his chambers secretly in the middle of the night, confirmed his understanding, through questioning gave him the robe and bowl that symbolized the transmission of the teaching, and told him to leave immediately and go into hiding in the southern mountains until the time was right for him to teach openly. Huineng became the sixth patriarch, and his lineage would become the dominant form of Zen Buddhism, the teaching that would spread throughout East Asia and eventually to the West. Sheng Xiu also became a respected teacher with his own lineage, honored and followed by many. Both verses contained truth, but Huineng's verse pointed to a liberation that Sheng Xiu's verse, for all its correctness, could not reach the liberation from the need to be right, from the need to possess understanding, from the need to control even one's own enlightenment. You live in Sheng Xiu's verse. You have spent your entire life learning the right way to do things, accumulating knowledge and credentials and proof that you understand correctly, polishing your mirror, removing dust, demonstrating to yourself and others that you are on the right path, that you have the right views, that you know what you're talking about. And this rightness has become a prison you don't recognize as a prison because it feels like virtue, like wisdom, like strength. You engage in political arguments online, spending hours crafting the perfect response that will prove your point, that will demonstrate the foolishness of the other side, that will win the debate. You are not actually trying to understand or to connect or to find common ground. You are trying to be right, to defend your position, to control the narrative, to prove that your way of seeing is correct, and anyone who disagrees is ignorant or malicious or deceived. The tighter you grip your correctness, the more enemies you create, the more isolated you become, the more exhausting life feels. But you cannot stop because letting go of being right feels like losing yourself, like admitting defeat, like betraying your values. You are Sheng Xiu, polishing your mirror of rightness with such vigorous dedication that you cannot see that the polishing itself is obscuring your vision. You have been hurt in a past relationship, and you carry the story of that hurt like a sacred text that must never be revised. You were wronged. You were the victim. Your ex-partner was the villain. This is the truth as you know it, and you grip this truth so tightly because admitting any complexity, that maybe you also made mistakes, that maybe they were doing the best they could with their own wounds, that maybe the story is more nuanced than villain and victim, feels like betraying yourself, like letting them off the hook, like saying the pain wasn't real. So you hold on to your version with iron determination, and this holding keeps the wound fresh, keeps you defined by what was done to you, keeps you locked in a past that cannot be changed, but also cannot be released as long as you need to be right about it. You have strong beliefs about how children should be raised, how food should be eaten, how bodies should be exercised, how work should be done, how people should live, and when you encounter someone doing it differently, you feel a surge of judgment and the need to correct them. You disguise this as concern, as trying to be helpful, as sharing valuable information, but underneath is the desperate need to have your way validated as the right way. You cannot simply allow that there might be multiple valid approaches, that what works for you might not work for others, that your path is not the path. Because if your way is not the universally correct way, then what have you been doing? What does it mean about all the effort you've put into doing it, right? The possibility that you might have been wrong or not wrong, but simply pursuing one option among many is so threatening that you must convert everyone to your way of seeing, must control their choices, must prove through their adoption of your methods that you have been right all along. You approach spirituality itself the way Shengshu approached the Dharma, with dedication, discipline, learning, and a deep attachment to doing it correctly. You have the right meditation technique, the right teacher, the right understanding of enlightenment. You can articulate sophisticated philosophy. You have read the books and attended the retreats and logged your hours of practice. And when you encounter someone whose practice looks different from yours, who found transformation through a path you consider inferior or incorrect, you feel threatened. You need them to be wrong so you can continue to be right. You need your path to be the path. And this very need keeps you trapped in spiritual materialism, in the accumulation of experiences and insights and proofs of your advancement, in the constant polishing of a mirror that was never actually dusty in the first place. Here is what Huineng understood that freed him from the need to be. Right, there is no fixed self that needs protecting through correctness. There is no solid identity that will crumble if your beliefs are challenged. There is no permanent you that will be destroyed if you admit you were wrong about something, even something important, even something you have built your life around. The very thing you are trying to protect through your desperate clinging to rightness does not exist in the way you think it does. You are not your opinions. You are not your understanding. You are not your beliefs. These are just temporary formations passing through the awareness you actually are, and they can change and shift and even be completely reversed without destroying what you fundamentally are. The most profound liberation comes when you can hold your deepest convictions lightly enough that they can evolve. This does not mean becoming wishy-washy or abandoning your values or pretending you don't have strong opinions. Huineng had strong understanding that surpassed Shengshu's decades of study, but he was not attached to that understanding. He did not need it to be recognized or validated. He did not need to defend it against challenge. He could speak it and then return to pounding rice, not because he was humble in a performative way, but because he genuinely did not need to control whether others saw things his way. Think about the areas of your life where you are most rigid, most defensive, most unable to consider alternative viewpoints. These are the places where you are gripping rightness like a life raft, where you have confused your identity with your beliefs, where you are trying to control reality by forcing it to conform to your understanding. And this grip is exhausting you. It is isolating you. It is preventing the very growth and evolution that you claim to value. What would it mean to hold your political beliefs strongly but lightly, to vote according to your values, while remaining genuinely curious about why intelligent, compassionate people might disagree with you? What would it mean to have a preferred approach to health or parenting or career, while truly allowing that others might thrive using completely different methods? What would it mean to follow a spiritual path with devotion while releasing the need for your path to be validated as the correct path, the best path, the path everyone should follow? This is not relativism that says nothing matters and all views are equally valid. Some approaches do lead to more suffering and some to less. Some understandings are more complete than others. But the tightness with which you grip your understanding is separate from the understanding itself. You can see clearly without needing to control whether others see the same way. You can know what you know without needing to prove it or defend it or convert others to it. You can be deeply committed to truth while remaining open to the possibility that truth is larger and more mysterious than your current grasp of it. Let me teach you the practice that emerges from this teaching. Identify an opinion you hold strongly, something you believe with certainty, something you might argue about passionately. It could be political, spiritual, practical, personal. Now, rather than examining whether this belief is true or false, simply notice how you hold it. Is your grip tight or loose? Does considering alternatives feel dangerous or interesting? Does encountering disagreement make you defensive or curious? The quality of your grip tells you whether you are using this belief as wisdom or as identity, as a tool for understanding, or as a weapon for defending the self. Practice introducing the phrase, "I could be wrong," into your certainties, not because you necessarily are wrong, but because this phrase loosens the grip. I believe this strongly, and I could be wrong. Notice what happens in your body when you say this. Does it feel like relief or like threat? If it feels like threat, like your whole sense of self is destabilized by the possibility of being wrong, then you have confused yourself with your beliefs. You have made your identity dependent on being right, and this dependency is a prison. Practice engaging with views different from yours, not to win arguments, but to understand how intelligent people can arrive at different conclusions. This is not about changing your mind or abandoning your values. This is about loosening your grip enough to remain curious, to remember that every person's perspective is shaped by experiences and circumstances. You may not fully understand that rightness is often far more complex than it appears from inside your own limited vantage point. Practice noticing when you are about to correct someone in conversation online in your own mind, and pause. Ask yourself, is this correction necessary? Is it kind? Is it invited? Or am I simply feeling the compulsive need to prove I'm right, to demonstrate my knowledge, to control the narrative? Most of your corrections are not actually about helping the other person. They are about maintaining your own sense of superior understanding. Let them go. Let people be wrong. Let their wrongness teach them in whatever time and way it needs to. Your job is not to police everyone's understanding, and practice holding paradox without collapsing it into false simplicity. Shengsu was right and Huineng was right. Gradual cultivation is valid, and sudden awakening is valid. Discipline matters, and the recognition that there is no one to discipline also matters. Your way works for you, and other ways work for others. You can have strong discernment without rigid judgment. You can see clearly without needing everyone to see what you see. Truth is large enough to hold contradictions that your small mind cannot reconcile. The teaching here cuts deeper than intellectual understanding. It asks you to release the most subtle form of control, the control over meaning itself, over truth, over what is right. It asks you to stop trying to win the contest of understanding and simply be with what you actually know, which is always less certain and more mysterious than the position you defend. It asks you to let the Bodhi tree have no branches, to let the mirror have no stand, to recognize that what you are protecting so fiercely does not need protection because it was never threatened in the first place. Huineng could write his verse and return to pounding rice, because he had nothing to prove. He had no investment in being recognized as enlightened. He was free from the need to control how others saw him, free from the need to defend his understanding, free from the need to be right. And this freedom made him more truly right than Shenshu, with all his correctness, could ever be. In the next chapter, the Buddha will make a fist and then open his hand, and in that simple gesture reveal the source of all suffering and the path to all freedom. For now, practice loosening your grip on rightness. Practice allowing yourself to not know. Practice the radical humility of recognizing that your understanding, no matter how sophisticated or hard-won, is still just one small flashlight beam in an infinite darkness, and that others' flashlights are illuminating corners you cannot see. Let yourself be wrong sometimes. Let yourself evolve. Let yourself be surprised by truth rather than defending yourself against it. The mirror was never dusty. You have been polishing air. The empty fist. Understanding that grasping itself creates suffering. In the grove at Jeta's monastery, on an ordinary afternoon when the monsoon rains had paused and sunlight filtered through the mango trees in shafts of gold, the Buddha sat teaching a small group of monks. They had been discussing complex points of philosophy, the nature of consciousness, the doctrine of dependent origination, the subtle distinctions between different types of meditation states. The questions had become increasingly abstract, the debate more and more intellectual, and the Buddha could see that his students were becoming lost in concepts trapped in the very thinking that was meant to liberate them. They were trying to understand freedom through the accumulation of knowledge, trying to grasp enlightenment through the tightening of mental effort. The Buddha stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. The sudden silence drew every student's attention. He raised his right hand slowly, deliberately, so that everyone could see clearly what he was doing. Then, with the same careful slowness, he closed his fingers one by one: thumb, index finger, middle finger, ring finger, small finger, curling them inward until his hand formed a tight fist. He held this position, his arm extended, his fist clenched so tightly that the tendons stood out like cords beneath his skin, the knuckles white with the force of the grip, the whole hand trembling slightly from the sustained tension. The monks watched in confused silence. This was not the Buddha's usual teaching method. He was not speaking. He was not explaining. He was simply showing them this clenched fist, holding it there in the dappled sunlight as moments stretched into what felt like minutes. Some of the monks grew uncomfortable. Others became curious. One young monk named Sariputta, known for his sharp intelligence, began to sense that something important was happening, though he could not yet articulate what. Finally, when the silence had become almost unbearable, when every eye was fixed on that trembling fist, the Buddha spoke. His voice was soft but clear, carrying easily in the quiet grove. "Tell me," he said, "if I hold my hand like this for too long, what will happen?" The monks stirred. Several started to speak at once, then deferred to Sariputta, whose understanding was usually the quickest. Sariputta looked at the Buddha's clenched fist, considered the question, and answered, "Venerable Sir, if you hold your hand clenched like that for too long, the muscles will cramp. The hand will begin to ache. The fingers will stiffen. Eventually, if held long enough, the hand could become paralyzed, unable to function properly. The very tightness meant to hold something, would result in the hand becoming useless, unable to hold anything at all. The Buddha nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth of this observation. "Yes," he said, "exactly so. The hand that grips too tightly becomes a hand that cannot grasp anything. The fist held too long becomes a prison for the hand itself." He paused, letting this sink in his fist, still clenched, still trembling with sustained effort. Then, very slowly, he began to open his hand. He released his thumb first, then each finger in turn, unfurling them gradually until his hand was completely open, palm facing upward toward the sky, fingers relaxed and slightly curved in their natural resting position. The transformation was striking. Where a moment before there had been tension and strain and the suggestion of pain, there was now ease, openness, the soft grace of a hand at rest. "And now?" the Buddha asked, holding up his open palm. "What about now?" Another monk, seeing the answer, clearly spoke up. "Now, Venerable Sir, your hand is free. It is at ease. It is relaxed. It can move naturally. It can receive things that are offered to it. It can give things away. It can perform any function a hand is meant to perform. It is no longer imprisoned by its own grip." The Buddha smiled, and in that smile was both infinite compassion and the pleasure of a teacher watching students arrive at understanding. He held his open palm there for another long moment, letting them see it, feel it, understand it, not just intellectually, but in their bodies, in the mirror neurons that made them feel the relief of opening their own hands. Then he lowered his hand and spoke words that would be remembered and repeated for 25 centuries. "This is the entire Dharma. This is everything I have been trying to teach you for all these years, shown in a single gesture. Grasping creates suffering. Letting go creates freedom. Everything else, all the sutras, all the doctrines, all the meditation techniques, all the philosophical distinctions we make, all of it is just commentary on this simple truth. The fist creates pain. The open hand is at peace. This is all you need to know." The monks sat in stunned silence because they could feel the truth of this teaching reverberating through every level of their being. They had been trying to grasp enlightenment, to hold on to correct understanding, to clutch at spiritual attainment. And in the very grasping, they had been creating the suffering they sought to escape. The answer was not in gripping harder, studying more, meditating longer, accumulating more knowledge or more merit or more insight. The answer was in opening the hand, simply opening the hand. Sariputta, whose intelligence now aligned with deeper wisdom, asked the question that was forming in all their minds. "But Venerable Sir, how do we know what to hold and what to release? How do we know when to grasp and when to let go?" The Buddha's response was immediate and clear. "You do not hold anything. You do not grasp anything. You can use things, you can engage with things, you can care deeply about things, but always with an open hand, never with a closed fist. The moment you clench, the moment you grip, the moment you try to possess or control or force something to remain exactly as it is, you have created suffering. For yourself, and often for what you are trying to hold." One of the older monks who had been practicing for many years but had never quite found the peace he sought, spoke up with some distress in his voice. "But Master, are we to care about nothing? Are we to be indifferent to everything? Surely there are things worth holding on to, our loved ones, our practice, our values, our dedication to the path." The Buddha shook his head. his expression gentle with understanding. You misunderstand. I am not teaching indifference. I am not suggesting you stop caring or stop engaging or stop loving. An open hand is not an empty heart. An open hand can hold something precious with great care. It simply holds it lightly enough that it can be what it is, that it can move or change or leave if that is its nature. A closed fist pretends to secure what it holds, but it actually suffocates, it crushes it, drives it away through the very tightness meant to keep it close. He held up his hand again, palm upward, and mimed placing something in it. Hold your loved ones like this, he said. Present, attentive, caring deeply, but not gripping, not demanding they remain unchanged, not trying to possess or control them. Hold your spiritual practice like this, devoted, engaged, sincere, but not attached to particular results, not demanding enlightenment, arrive on your schedule, not gripping the path so tightly that you forget to actually walk it. Hold your values like this, living by them with integrity, but remaining open to growth and evolution, not so rigidly attached to your current understanding that you cannot see when life is trying to teach you something new. You know the pain of the clenched fist intimately because you live it every single day in ways both obvious and subtle. You are in a relationship and you can feel the person you love changing, evolving, becoming interested in things that don't include you, developing friendships. You're not part of having experiences you don't share. And instead of celebrating their growth, instead of trusting the connection you have, you clench. You check their phone, you ask where they've been. You create small tests to measure their love. You try to shape them back into the version you fell in love with, the version you could understand and control. You grip them tighter and tighter, and with each tightening you feel them pulling away. Feel the relationship becoming strained. Feel the love that was natural becoming obligation. You are creating the very abandonment you fear through your desperate attempt to prevent it. Your closed fist is driving away what your open hand could have kept. You have children, and you love them with a fierce intensity that borders on pain. You want so desperately for them to be safe, to make good choices, to have better lives than you had to avoid your mistakes. And so you clench around them, you micromanage their schedules, control their friendships, make their decisions for them, plan their futures, without asking what futures they dream of themselves. You hold them so tightly they can barely breathe, can barely discover who they are, separate from your vision of who they should be. And then you are shocked when they lie to you, when they rebel, when they cannot wait to leave home, when they keep their real lives hidden from you, because you have made it clear that you cannot accept them as they actually are, only as you need them to be. Your love is real, but your grip is suffocating the very connection that love creates. You have a career, an identity, a sense of self built around what you do and how well you do it. You are the competent one, the professional, the person who has it together. You grip this identity desperately because it feels like the only solid ground. You have the only proof of your worth, the only thing protecting you from the chaos of not knowing who you are. And then your company downsizes, or your industry changes, or your body develops a condition that makes your work impossible, or you simply burn out from years of performing competence you only half felt. The identity you gripped so tightly is torn from your hands, and you collapse completely because you had confused your clenched fist with your actual self. You had made your worth dependent on something that was always temporary, always subject to conditions beyond your control. If you had held your career with an open hand, engaged, skilled, dedicated, but not clinging, the loss would still hurt, but it would not destroy you. You would still know who you are beneath the role. You have ideas about how your life should look. By now, the partner. You should have the home. You should own the achievements. You should have accumulated. The body. You should inhabit the peace you should have found. You carry these ideas like blueprints, and you are furiously trying to force reality to match them, trying to grip the raw material of your actual life and shape it into the life you believe you're supposed to have. Every day that passes without the manifestation of this vision feels like failure. Every deviation from the plan feels like evidence that something is wrong with you. You are clenching so hard around how things should be that you cannot see or appreciate how things actually are. You are missing the life you have while gripping desperately for the life you think you're supposed to have. Your fist is cramping, your hand is aching, but you cannot unclench because you believe that letting go means giving up on your dreams, accepting less settling for inadequacy. But here is what the Buddha's simple gesture reveals. The cramping in your hand is not coming from life. It is coming from your grip. The pain is not in the circumstances, but in your refusal to accept them. Your constant battle against what is your exhausting attempt to control the uncontrollable. Every moment you spend with your fist clenched around how things should be is a moment you are unavailable for how things are. Every ounce of energy you pour into trying to force reality to match your demands is energy you could be using to engage skillfully with reality as it presents itself. Think about your body right now in this moment. Scan through it slowly and notice where you are holding tension. Your jaw, is it clenched? Your shoulders, are they pulled up toward your ears? Your hands, are they curled into fists or flat and open? Your stomach, is it tight, braced against some imagined blow? Your breath, is it shallow and held or deep and flowing? Every place you find tightness is a place where you are gripping something, gripping against fear, gripping against uncertainty, gripping against the feeling of not being in control. And this gripping is exhausting you. It is creating pain. It is limiting your movement, your freedom, your ability to respond to life with flexibility and grace. The Buddha's teaching is radically simple. Stop clenching. Not because clenching is morally wrong, not because you should be more spiritual or evolved, but because clenching hurts and opening feels better. This is not philosophy. This is direct experiential truth. Try it right now. Make a fist as tight as you can. Hold it. Notice how it feels. Notice the tension, the effort, the discomfort. Now open your hand completely. Notice the relief, the ease, the sense of space and freedom. The Buddha is not asking you to believe something. He is asking you to notice what your own body already knows, that grasping creates suffering and letting go creates peace. But your mind will protest. It will say, if I unclench, I will lose everything. If I stop controlling, everything will fall apart. If I open my hand, what I love will leave me. If I stop gripping my life so tightly, I will have no life at all. And this is the lie that keeps you imprisoned. This is the fear that makes you hold on even as your hand cramps and aches and begins to lose all feeling. The truth is exactly opposite. What you can genuinely lose by opening your hand, you were never actually holding in the first place. The relationship you grip desperately is already slipping away, not because you release your grip, but because your grip is crushing it. The identity you clutch is already dissolving, not because you let go, but because all identities are temporary, and your clutching doesn't change that. The control you think you have is an illusion. You were never actually controlling anything except the tension in your own nervous system. And what cannot be lost will remain when you open your hand. Love that is real doesn't need to be imprisoned to stay. Work that serves your actual purpose doesn't require desperate clinging to continue. Peace that is genuine isn't maintained by force. When you open your hand, what belongs stays. What needs to leave goes. And you discover that you are still here, still whole, still capable of engaging with life, but now without the constant ache of grasping. Let me teach you the practice that emerged from the Buddha's teaching. Several times throughout your day, bring your attention to your hands. Notice if they are clenched around your phone, around the steering wheel, around your coffee cup, around nothing at all, just habitually tight. This physical clenching is connected to mental and emotional clenching. Now deliberately open your hands, spread your fingers wide, turn your palms up and hold them in this open position for several breaths. As you do this, ask yourself, what am I gripping right now? What am I trying to control? It might be an outcome. You're anxious about a person whose behavior you're trying to change, a feeling you're trying to avoid, an image you're trying to maintain. Don't judge yourself for the gripping. Simply notice it with the same neutral observation you would notice that your hand is closed. Then, with your next exhale, practice the release. Imagine opening your mental and emotional fist the same way you've opened your physical one. You are not abandoning what you care about. You are simply holding it differently, present with it, engaged with it, but not strangling it with your need to control it. Notice if this feels frightening. Notice if it feels liberating. Notice if it feels like both at the same time. Practice making an inventory of your grips. Write down everything you are currently holding, tightly: relationships, outcomes, identities, beliefs, plans, grievances, hopes, fears. For each item, ask, am I holding this with a clenched fist or an open hand? If clenched, what would it look like to open your hand around it? This doesn't mean letting it go entirely. It means examining whether your tight grip is actually helping or just creating the cramping ache of control. Practice distinguishing between caring deeply and gripping tightly. You can love someone intensely with an open hand. You can be committed to your work without clutching your identity. You can have strong values without rigidly controlling how they must manifest. The quality of openness is not the same as the quality of indifference. An open hand is a hand that can still hold, still touch, still engage it, simply does so without the violence of possession. And practice noticing the moments when life pries open your fingers against your will, when you lose something you were gripping, when someone leaves, when plans fall apart, when control is taken from you. And rather than immediately clenching around something else, rather than scrambling to find new objects to grasp, practice staying with the open hand. Notice that you are still here. Notice that you are still breathing. Notice that you can survive with your hands open. Notice perhaps that you feel more alive with your hands open than you ever did with them clenched. The Buddha held up his fist and asked, What would happen if he held it too long and his students correctly identified that it would cramp, ache, become paralyzed, become useless? This is your life when you live with clenched fists, cramping, aching, paralyzed, unable to function in the way you were designed to function. You were not made to grip and control and force and demand. You were made to flow and engage and respond and release. You were made to hold things lightly, to touch without possessing, to love without imprisoning. The teaching is complete. The fist creates pain. The open hand is free. Everything you have been seeking, peace, love, security, happiness, meaning becomes possible not when you finally manage to grip it tightly enough, but when you stop gripping entirely. When you open your hand and discover that what is real was there all along, resting in your palm, never needing to be clutched because it was never planning to leave. And what wasn't real, what was always meant to be temporary, can finally flow on its way without taking you with it, without destroying you in its leaving. In the final chapter, a great king will come to the Buddha and ask what he can truly possess forever, and the answer will dismantle the deepest grip of all the grip on the sense of self, on the illusion of I and mine, on the belief that there is something permanent that needs controlling in the first place. For now, open your hands. Feel the relief. Feel the space. Feel the possibility. The Buddha raised his fist to show you prison. He opened his hand to show you freedom. The choice, as it always has been, is yours to make in each moment. Clench and suffer, or open and breathe. The Dharma has never been more complicated than this. King Pasenadi and the teaching of non-self, releasing the ultimate control, your identity. In the great city of Savatthi, capital of the kingdom of Kosala, there ruled a king named Pasenadi, who was known throughout India as one of the most powerful monarchs of his age. His armies were vast and disciplined. His treasury overflowed with gold. His palace was a marvel of architecture, with courtyards of marble and gardens that stretched for acres, with fountains that sang and peacocks that wandered freely among flowering trees. He had hundreds of servants who existed only to fulfill his wishes, wives and concubines who competed for his favor, advisors and ministers who implemented his every command. When King Pasenadi spoke, his words became law across territories so vast that a man could walk for months without leaving land the king controlled. He was by every measure his culture recognized at the pinnacle of human achievement and power. And yet, King Pasenadi could not sleep. He would lie in his silk-draped bed in rooms perfumed with sandalwood and lotus, and his mind would race with questions that his power could not answer, and his wealth could not silence. He thought about the bodies he had seen prepared for cremation, including the body of his own father, just 2 years before, reduced from a mighty king to ashes and smoke. He thought about the territories he had conquered that were already being contested by neighboring rulers. He thought about his own face in the bronze mirror, the lines deepening around his eyes, the grey threading through his beard. He thought about the fact that despite all his power, he could not command his body to stop aging, could not order time to slow down, could not force the world to remain as it was in this moment, when he was still strong, still vital, still in control. The Buddha had been teaching in Savatthi for several years, staying in a monastery built for him by a wealthy supporter. The king had attended some of these teachings, had been impressed by the clarity and compassion of this wandering ascetic who owned nothing but seemed to possess a peace that eluded kings. And so, one evening, when his insomnia had become unbearable and his questions had grown too loud to ignore, King Pasenadi did something remarkable. He left his palace alone without guards or attendants dressed in simple clothes and walked through the darkened streets to the monastery where the Buddha was staying. He found the Buddha sitting outside under a great Bodhi tree, the same tree where monks often meditated, its leaves rustling softly in the night breeze. The Buddha looked up as the king approached, and though he certainly recognized one of the most powerful men in India standing before him in common clothes, he showed no surprise, no deference, no change in the peaceful expression he wore. He simply gestured to the ground beside him, inviting the king to sit as he would invite any visitor. King Pasenadi sat, and for a long moment he could not speak. Here he was a man who commanded armies with his words, who shaped policy with his decrees, who could order the death or liberation of any person in his kingdom, and he found himself speechless before this monk who owned nothing and commanded no one. Finally, the question that had been burning in him for months, perhaps years, perhaps his entire life, found its way to his lips. "Venerable sir," he said, his voice quiet and almost vulnerable, in a way it never was in his throne room. "I have come to ask you something that haunts me. I possess so much land, wealth, power, people who serve me and claim to love me. I have spent my life acquiring and defending and expanding what is mine. And yet, is there anything that is truly mine? Anything I can possess forever? Anything that cannot be taken from me?" The Buddha looked at this powerful king with eyes full of compassion, seeing not the crown and the armies and the territories, but the frightened human being, grasping desperately at permanence in a world where everything flows and changes and dissolves. He let the question sit in the air between them for a moment, giving it weight, honoring the courage it took for a king to ask it. Then the Buddha began to ask his own questions, and each one was like a gentle but inexorable blow to the edifice of certainty the king had built his life upon. "Great king," the Buddha said, "this body of yours that sits here now, this flesh and bone and blood that you call my body, can you command it never to age? Can you decree that from this day forward, your body shall remain exactly as it is, that no wrinkles shall form, that no strength shall diminish, that time shall have no power over your physical form?" King Pasenadi felt something tighten in his chest. He shook his head slowly. "No, venerable sir, I cannot. My body ages despite my wishes. Already I feel it. My knees ache when I rise, my eyesight dims in low light, my breath comes shorter when I climb stairs. I have the finest physicians, the best food servants to tend my every need, and still my body follows its own path toward old age. And can you command it never to become sick?" The Buddha continued, his voice gentle but relentless. "Can you order your body never to know fever or pain or disease? No, Lord." The king's voice was barely above a whisper now. "I have been ill. I have felt pain. My power means nothing to a fever or a stone in the kidney. When I am sick, I suffer like any peasant suffers. And can you decree that your body shall never die? Can you with all your armies and all your gold command this body to remain in this world indefinitely, to refuse the call of death when it comes?" The king closed his eyes. This was the question that had been keeping him awake, the truth he could not escape, no matter how thick his palace walls or how numerous his guards. "No, venerable sir, I will die. Perhaps today, perhaps in 30 years, but I will die. This body that I call mine will become a corpse, will be burned or buried, will return to elements. I cannot prevent this, no matter what I do." The Buddha nodded, acknowledging this painful truth. "So this body which you have called mine all your life, which you have adorned with fine clothes and protected with armor which you have identified as yourself, this body does not actually obey you. It ages without your permission. It sickens despite your wishes. It will die regardless of your commands. In what sense, then, is it truly yours?" The king sat with this feeling, the ground shifting beneath his understanding. But the Buddha was not finished. "And what of your possessions, great king? Your treasury of gold, your lands, your palaces, your elephants and horses and fine things, can you take them with you when you leave this life? When death comes, can you say to it, 'Wait, let me pack my belongings, let me bring my wealth with me'?" King Pasenadi knew the answer even before he spoke it. He had seen his father cremated, had watched as the body was wrapped in simple cloth, regardless of all the riches it had commanded in life, had seen how death makes no distinction between king and beggar. "No, Lord, when I die, everything remains here. My gold will pass to others. My lands will be ruled by whoever takes them. My palaces will house different occupants. I take nothing with me." And even in this life, the Buddha pressed on, "Can you truly control these possessions? Your gold can be stolen, your lands can be conquered, your palaces can burn. Crops fail, treasuries deplete, kingdoms rise and fall. You spend enormous energy trying to protect and expand what you call mine. And yet all of it remains subject to conditions beyond your ultimate control. You are like a man trying to hold water in his hands, no matter how tightly he grips it, slips away." The king felt tears forming in his eyes, though he could not have said if they were tears of grief or of relief. Everything the Buddha was saying aligned with the truth he had been running from his entire adult life. "And what of the people in your life, great king? Your wives, your children, your servants, your subjects? Can you control their thoughts? Can you command them to love you genuinely? Can you force them to remain loyal, regardless of circumstances? Can you prevent them from changing, from growing old, from dying, from leaving you in one way or another?" "No," the king said, his voice breaking slightly. "I have power over their actions, perhaps through fear or obligation. But their hearts, their true thoughts, I cannot command these. My wives may smile at me while thinking of others. My advisors may praise me while plotting. My children will inherit my throne, and then I will be merely a memory to them. And all of them will die, will leave me, will become dust, just as I will." The Buddha let silence fill the space between them, let the king feel the full weight of what he was discovering. Then, with infinite gentleness, he spoke the teaching that was the culmination of everything, the final relinquishment, the ultimate letting go. "And so, great king, we arrive at the deepest question. This sense of I, that you have this feeling of being a permanent, solid, separate self that owns a body and possesses things and controls a kingdom. Can you find this self? Can you point to it? Is it in your body? But you have just acknowledged that your body is not truly yours, that it does not obey you. Is it in your thoughts? but your thoughts arise and pass away, continuously changing every moment. Which thought is the permanent you? Is it in your feelings? But feelings come and go, like clouds across the sky. Which feeling is the essential self? Is it in your memories? But memories fade and distort and transform. Which memory is the unchanging you? King Pasenadi sat very still, searching within himself for the thing he had always assumed was there, the solid, permanent I that was having all these experiences, that owned this body, that ruled this kingdom. And he could not find it. Everywhere he looked, he found only processes: breathing, thinking, feeling, sensing, but no solid entity doing these things. Just the doing itself, arising moment by moment, with no one behind it pulling the strings. There is no permanent self to be found, great king, the Buddha said softly, his words both devastating and liberating at once. This is the deepest truth and the final freedom. What you have been trying all your life to control, this sense of I, this identity, this solid separate self, is itself a construction, a habit of thought, a story you tell so repeatedly that you mistake it for reality. And all your suffering, all your anxiety, all your desperate attempts to control your body, your possessions, other people, time itself, all of it comes from trying to protect and maintain a self that is not actually there in the way you think it is. The king felt as if he were falling, but it was not the terrible fall he had feared all his life. It was more like floating, like being released from a weight he had carried for so long he had forgotten it was there. But venerable sir, he asked, his voice trembling, if there is no permanent self, then who am I? What am I? What is sitting here speaking with you? The Buddha smiled, and in that smile was the warmth of the sun and the vastness of the sky. You are not a noun, great king. You are a verb. You are not a thing, but a process, a flow of consciousness, a dance of conditions arising and passing away. A river that is never the same water twice, but continues to be a river. You are awareness itself, pure and luminous and free temporarily, taking the form of a king, temporarily experiencing these thoughts and feelings and sensations, but not actually identical to any of them. You are like space, vast enough to contain everything, but not limited by anything it contains. But then, the king asked, feeling both terrified and exhilarated by this recognition, what is mine? If this body is not mine, if these possessions are not mine, if this very sense of self is not mine, what do I have? What can I hold on to? The Buddha's answer was simple and complete. Nothing. You have nothing. You hold nothing. And this is your liberation. When you finally fully recognize that there is nothing to hold and no one to hold it, you are free. Free from fear because there is no permanent self that can be threatened. Free from grief because there is no solid identity that can be lost. Free from the exhausting project of maintaining and defending a self that was never actually there to begin with. You live King Pasenadi's question every day, though perhaps you have never articulated it as clearly as he did. You scroll through social media, curating your identity, desperately trying to control how others perceive you, building an image of who you are, and then becoming imprisoned by that image. You present a carefully edited version of yourself, the successful you, the happy you, the attractive you, the spiritual you, the together you, and then you exhaust yourself, trying to maintain this performance, terrified that if people saw who you really are beneath the curation, they would reject you. But who you really are keeps changing anyway. Who you were yesterday is not who you are today. Who you are right now is not who you will be in an hour. There is no solid self to curate, only a flowing process you keep trying to freeze into a single image. You build an identity around your achievements. I am a doctor, I am an artist, I am a parent, I am successful, I am spiritual, I am someone who has overcome trauma, and then you cling to this identity with desperate intensity because it feels like the only solid ground you have. When anything threatens this identity, a career setback, creative failure, children who grow up and leave success that doesn't bring the fulfillment you expected, spiritual experiences that reveal how much you still don't understand, you experience it not as a simple loss, but as an existential threat, because you have confused this temporary role with your permanent self. You have mistaken the costume for the actor. You look at photographs of yourself from 10 years ago and barely recognize that person. The face is different, the body is different, the beliefs are different, the personality is different. You are not the same person who graduated high school, or got married, or started that first job. Every cell in your body has been replaced multiple times. Every thought pattern has been rewired. Every memory has been reconsolidated and subtly altered. If you are not the same person you were 10 years ago, which version is the real you? The answer is that both are real and neither is permanent. You are a process, not a thing, a river, not a stone. You carry stories about who you are based on your past. I am someone who was abused. I am someone who failed. I am someone who succeeded against the odds. I am someone who always struggles with relationships. I am someone who is fundamentally broken. I am someone who is on a spiritual journey. And these stories, which may have been useful at one time to help you make sense of your experience, become prisons. You cannot act in ways that contradict your story, because your story has become your identity. You cannot let yourself be happy if your story is that you are damaged. You cannot let yourself fail if your story is that you are successful. You cannot let yourself simply be a human being having a human experience because you have invested too much in being a specific character with a specific narrative arc. But the Buddha's teaching to King Pasenadi offers a liberation more complete than anything you have imagined. If there is no permanent self, then there is no permanent self that can be judged, rejected, found wanting, or destroyed. The you that you are so desperately trying to control and protect and perfect does not actually exist as a solid entity. It is a useful convention, a way of organizing experience, but it is not an ultimate reality. When you fail at something, no permanent self has failed. When you are rejected, no permanent self has been rejected. When you age or gain weight, or lose your abilities, no permanent self has been diminished. These are just events arising in awareness conditions, changing the river flowing. The suffering comes not from the events themselves, but from your identification with a solid self that you believe is being threatened by them. And here is the deepest paradox: when you stop trying to maintain and defend a solid self, you don't disappear. You don't become nothing. Instead, you become available to life in a way you never were when you were busy trying to control your identity. You can fail without being destroyed because there is no permanent failure identity to carry. You can be rejected without being annihilated because there is no solid self whose worth depends on being accepted. You can change completely without losing yourself because there was no solid self to lose, only this flowing, evolving process that you are. Think about how much energy you spend every day trying to control your identity. You rehearse conversations to make sure you say the right thing, the thing that will make people see you as smart or kind or funny or deep. You choose your clothes carefully to project a certain image. You monitor your social media to ensure your life looks the way you want it to look. You hide parts of yourself that don't fit your story, your confusion. If your story is confidence, your joy. If your story is suffering, your ordinariness. If your story is specialness. You are playing a character so consistently that you have forgotten you are playing. The Buddha is inviting you to stop playing. Not to become nothing, but to stop pretending to be a fixed something. To recognize that you are more like weather than like stone, constantly moving, changing, responding to conditions, never the same pattern twice, but still somehow coherently you. This is not depressing or nihilistic. This is the most liberating truth you will ever encounter. You are not the small, solid, separate self you have been trying so hard to maintain. You are the vast awareness in which that small self appears and disappears, like a wave appearing and disappearing in an ocean. The wave is real, but it is not separate from the ocean. You are real, but you are not separate from the flowing process of life itself. Let me teach you the practice that emerges from this deepest teaching. Several times today, pause and ask yourself, who is aware right now? Notice that you can observe your thoughts, which means you are not identical to your thoughts. Notice that you can observe your feelings, which means you are not identical to your feelings. Notice that you can observe your body's sensations, which means you are not identical to your body. If you can observe all these things, what is doing the observing? Don't try to find an answer in words or concepts. Just rest in the noticing itself. Rest in the awareness that is aware of everything but cannot be found as an object. This awareness is what you actually are, not a thing, but the capacity for experience itself, pure and open and ungraspable. Practice introducing some looseness into your self-concept. When you notice yourself thinking, I am someone who always does this, or I am the kind of person who would never do that, add a gentle reminder, right now I am experiencing this pattern. Tomorrow I might experience a different one. You are not defending or solidifying an identity. You are simply allowing yourself to be as fluid and responsive as life actually is. Practice catching yourself in moments of self-maintenance when you're about to say something to prove you're smart, or hide something to maintain your image, or defend yourself to protect your story, and pause. What would happen if you just let it go? If you let yourself be misunderstood, be imperfect, be ordinary, be changing? What would happen if you stopped working so hard to be a consistent character and just responded to each moment as it comes? And practice sitting with the fear that arises when you start to loosen your grip on identity. This fear is real. You have spent your entire life believing that maintaining a solid self is necessary for survival. Learning that this solid self is a construction can feel like standing at the edge of an abyss. But what you discover when you look into that abyss is that it is not empty. It is full of space, full of possibility, full of the freedom to be different in each moment, full of life itself flowing through you rather than being controlled by you. King Pasenadi sat with the Buddha under that Bodhi tree, as the night deepened around them, and something fundamental shifted in him. He did not suddenly stop being a king. He did not abandon his responsibilities or his throne, but he stopped believing that King Pasenadi was a solid, permanent thing that needed defending. He returned to his palace and continued to rule, but now he held his kingship lightly, like a role he was playing, rather than a truth about who he fundamentally was. And this lightness, this release of the deepest grip of all, brought him the peace that all his power and wealth never could. You are King Pasenadi. You have built a kingdom of identity, accumulated a treasury of stories about who you are, defended borders against anything that threatens your self-concept. And you are exhausted from this defense. The Buddha's teaching offers you the same liberation. He offered the king the recognition that there is no permanent self, to defend no solid identity, to maintain no fixed you that can be destroyed. There is only this moment, this breath, this awareness, this flowing process that needs no protection because it has no edges to protect. As we close this journey through 6 teachings on surrender, you return to where you started, lying in the dark, unable to sleep, gripping everything too tightly. But now, you have walked with Subhuti to the river and learned to flow. You have sat with the old farmer and learned to suspend judgment. You have held Ananda's cracked bowl and learned to accept imperfection. You have watched Huineng and Shengshu and learned to release being right. You have seen the Buddha make a fist and open his hand and learned that grasping itself creates suffering. And you have sat with King Pasenadi and learned the final truth that there is no one to do the gripping in the first place. Open your hands now, not because you should not, because it will make you spiritual, but because your hands are tired from clutching, and opening them brings relief. Open your mind, open your heart, open your grip on who you think you are. Let yourself be surprised by who you actually are beneath all the controlling, all the maintaining, all the desperate attempts to hold life still. The river is still flowing. The bowl is still cracked. The Bodhi tree still has no branches. The fist can open into a hand. And you are still here, more spacious and free than you ever imagined possible. Not because you achieved something, but because you finally stopped trying to control everything. Because you surrendered, not in defeat, but into the peace that was always waiting beneath your grip. Rest now, breathe, let go. The teaching is complete. You are free. You have walked this path with us for 2 hours through 6 ancient stories that hold timeless wisdom. Your willingness to listen, to stay present, to allow these teachings to touch you, this itself is a form of surrender, a gentle opening of the hand you didn't know was clenched. If this journey has brought you peace, if these stories have spoken to something deep within you, please consider sharing this with someone who is also learning to let go. Your simple act of pressing like helps Buddhist Insight's journey reach others who are lying awake in the dark, gripping too tightly, searching for the relief that comes with surrender. And if you wish to continue walking this path with us, to receive more ancient wisdom for modern hearts, please subscribe to Buddhist Insight's journey. Let these teachings find you whenever your hands are clenched, whenever you need to remember that the river is trying to carry you. For now, rest. Let your body be heavy. Let your breath be soft. Let your hands stay open. The stories are complete, but their wisdom continues in the silence in your sleep, in your dreams, in every moment you choose, flow over force. May you be at peace. May you be free. May your hands remain open. Buddhist Insights Journey.